The morning had begun like any other, with the city streets buzzing with life. People hurried along the sidewalks, some clutching briefcases, others balancing coffee cups, and the sound of cars honking echoed faintly in the background. The aroma of fresh coffee wafted through the air, mixing with the crispness of the early autumn breeze. Inside one of the city's busiest cafes, the energy was palpable. Baristas moved quickly behind the counter, steaming milk, grinding beans, and calling out orders as customers jostled for space to wait or collect their drinks. There was a rhythm to the chaos, a familiar dance that regulars and staff alike had grown used to. Among the crowd was a man who carried himself with a calm confidence, dressed in a casual suit but with a presence that seemed to demand attention. He was not in uniform, yet there was something in the way he moved, deliberate and aware, that set him apart from the rest of the hurried crowd. His eyes scanned the room as he made his way to the counter, noting the different people around him, a young woman reading a book in the corner, an elderly man quietly sipping his black coffee, and a group of coworkers laughing over their morning orders. Everyone seemed wrapped up in their own world. Unaware of how quickly the morning could change, a uniformed police officer entered the cafe at nearly the same time, a standard cup of coffee in hand, seemingly in a rush to get out. The officer was mid-conversation on a mobile phone, speaking in a low voice but with urgency that suggested something had come up. His focus was split, eyes darting between the screen and the counter as he took careful steps toward the exit. He didn't notice the man standing near the doorway, also making his way out after receiving his own order. The officer adjusted his grip on the cup, trying to balance the hot liquid, while the man shifted his weight to open the door, and in a split second, their paths collided. Time seemed to slow for just a moment. The cup tipped, and a scalding wave of coffee splashed across the front of the man's suit. He jumped back instinctively, the shock and the burn making him stumble slightly. The officer's eyes widened as he realized what had happened, and he immediately put down his phone and reached for napkins, his voice rushing out in hurried apologies. "I'm so sorry. I didn't see you there. Here, let me help." The man, now soaked with hot coffee, wiped at his clothes, his hands trembling with a mix of anger and pain. His face flushed, not just from the heat of the liquid, but from the sudden jolt of being caught in such an unexpected situation. People nearby stopped their conversations and turned to watch, sensing the rising tension. The atmosphere in the cafe shifted. What had been a typical busy morning now felt charged, almost electric with anticipation of what might happen next. The officer, still holding napkins, tried to step closer, his voice steady but filled with genuine concern. "Are you okay? Did it burn you badly? I can call for medical help if you need it." But the man's anger was quick to surface. He waved the napkins away, his voice rising slightly. "I can't believe this. Look at my suit. Do you have any idea how expensive this is? You're supposed to watch where you're going." The cafe seemed to shrink in those few moments, all attention drawn to the two men at the center of the accident. Patrons whispered among themselves, glancing at each other with a mix of curiosity and concern. A couple of baristas peeked from behind the counter, unsure whether to or wait. The tension was palpable, a mixture of the unexpected and the very human reaction to frustration and embarrassment. The officer, sensing the situation could escalate, tried to keep his tone calm and neutral. "I understand, and I truly am sorry. It was an accident. I didn't mean to." He stopped mid-sentence as he noticed the man's intense glare. The man's eyes were sharp, a mixture of shock, anger, and disbelief, and it was clear that he was struggling to regain composure. He shook his head, muttering under his breath about ruined clothes and ruined mornings, his frustration echoing in the small space. For a moment, neither man moved. The spilled coffee was now slowly cooling, but the heat of the situation had only grown. People around them began to take subtle steps back, giving space but still watching closely. A few brave patrons whispered suggestions, like offering tissues or suggesting the man calm down, but their words barely cut through the tension. The officer's hands remained raised slightly, a gesture of peace and apology while the man wiped at his suit. His movements sharp and defensive, the cafe's noise seemed distant now. the usual clatter of cups and chatter fading into the background as if the entire space was holding its breath. The officer's mind raced, thinking about how quickly an ordinary morning could turn into something tense. He considered the protocols, the words he should say, the gestures that might de-escalate the situation. Meanwhile, the man's thoughts were on the suit, the heat from the coffee and the shock of the collision. He was torn between the instinct to lash out and the awareness that this was, in some ways, just a random accident. Then the officer did something unexpected. He paused, took a deep breath, and spoke in a steady, calm voice. "Sir, I need you to understand something. Accidents happen, yes, but I want you to know who you're speaking to." He reached into his coat slowly, deliberately, and the room seemed to lean in, sensing that this was more than a simple apology. The man, still fuming but now slightly confused, blinked and straightened up, unsure of what the officer meant. The whispers among the patrons grew louder, curiosity sparking in every corner. The tension hung thickly in the air, both men momentarily frozen in their own thoughts. The spilled coffee, once the center of attention, seemed almost secondary to the unspoken question that had emerged. Who was this man, and why did he speak with such controlled authority? The officer's hand hovered near his coat pocket, a small gesture that hinted at something more, something that could completely change the dynamic of the situation. People around them tried to focus on their own activities, pretending not to notice, but every eye in the cafe was subtly drawn to the interaction. The baristas continued their work, though their movements were slower, careful, as if they too were waiting for the next move. The man, still wiping at his soaked suit, glanced up at the officer, his anger now mingled with curiosity and a hint of apprehension. The reality that this could escalate beyond a simple coffee spill began to settle in. Outside, the city moved on in its usual rhythm. Cars honked, bicycles whizzed by, and pedestrians navigated the crowded sidewalks. But inside the cafe, time seemed to stretch, every second laden with the potential for either conflict or resolution. The officer's calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the man's initial flare of anger, creating a tension that was almost cinematic in its intensity. And so, in that small cafe on a seemingly ordinary morning, two men faced a moment that could have spiraled into chaos. One had spilled coffee by accident, and the other had been caught in an unexpected mishap. Both were aware of their own emotions, the heat of embarrassment and the instinctive responses that humans have to sudden conflict. The scene was set, the stakes more than just a ruined suit, and the cafe itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would happen next. The man, still dripping with coffee and visibly shaken, took a step back and raised his hand slightly, as if to shield himself from any further incident. His mind raced, trying to comprehend what had just happened. The hot liquid had not only ruined his suit, but also stunned him with its suddenness. He could feel the sting of the coffee against his skin and the rush of embarrassment as every eye in the cafe seemed to be on him. The officer remained calm, watching carefully, aware that every movement he made would either diffuse the tension or ignite it further. The man's breathing was slightly heavy, his chest rising and falling with the effort to control his temper. He glanced around, noticing the quiet curiosity of the people nearby. Some were pretending to be absorbed in their phones or newspapers, but he could see the subtle glances and the soft murmur of whispers that hinted at their intrigue. There was a mix of sympathy and fascination in the way the onlookers observed the scene. In that moment, the ordinary cafe had transformed into a stage, and he was unwillingly playing a role that neither he nor the officer had prepared for. The officer, understanding the importance of careful words, crouched slightly to show a non-threatening posture and offered another apology, his tone steady and sincere. "Sir, I realize this is frustrating. I didn't see you there, and I truly am sorry for what happened. Please let me help." He reached out again with napkins, his eyes calm and patient, showing that he meant no harm. There was no rush, no impatience in his voice, only a quiet acknowledgement of the man's discomfort and irritation. The man hesitated, gripping the soaked fabric of his suit, trying to regain control over his emotions. He wanted to lash out, to express the unfairness of the situation, but something in the officer's measured tone and posture made him pause. The cafe, though noisy and filled with the scent of coffee, had taken on an almost intimate focus around the two of them. Every gesture, every glance seemed amplified, and the man became acutely aware of how he appeared to others. A slight tremor ran through his hands as he dabbed at the coffee stain. He felt a mix of relief and tension, aware that lashing out could escalate the situation, yet also frustrated by the mishap. The officer, recognizing the flicker of restraint, leaned slightly closer, not to intimidate but to show cooperation. "I know this isn't ideal, and I understand why you're upset," he said softly. "I promise I will make this right. If you want, we can get this cleaned up, and I can cover any damage." The man's eyes flicked up, meeting the officer's gaze for the first time in a moment that felt suspended in time. There was a strange sense of authority in the officer's demeanor, something beyond the uniform and coffee cup. The man felt the sudden realization that the situation was more complex than he had initially thought. His anger, while justified in the immediate moment, began to be tempered by a creeping curiosity about who exactly he was dealing with. There was something familiar yet unplaceable in the way the officer carried himself, a quiet confidence that demanded attention without force. A few patrons murmured among themselves, sharing their observations in hushed tones. One customer, attempting to be helpful, whispered to a friend, suggesting that perhaps they should step aside and let the men sort it out. Another patron offered tissues, placing them on the counter near the man. The atmosphere, once charged with tension, began to shift slightly, moving from immediate anger toward cautious observation. The man noticed the subtle change and felt a flicker of both relief and apprehension. The officer remained calm, refusing to allow the situation to spiral further. He spoke in short, clear sentences, ensuring the man understood that his intentions were sincere. "Accidents happen," he said, nodding slightly, "but I want to make sure you are taken care of. There's no need for any confrontation." The simplicity of the statement carried weight, and the man, although still frustrated, began to recognize the thoughtfulness behind it. It was not just an apology. It was an attempt to restore balance and show respect. As the man processed the words, his initial frustration began to mingle with a strange sense of curiosity. Who was this officer? He seemed more than just a regular police officer. There was a certain precision in his movements, a controlled awareness of his surroundings, and an air of confidence that suggested he dealt with high-stakes situations regularly. The man's anger, while still present, was tempered by the realization that reacting recklessly could have unforeseen consequences. The officer continued to offer reassurance, carefully measuring each word to avoid further escalation. "I understand this is your morning and you were likely in a rush. Let's take a moment to handle this calmly. I assure you I want to make this right." His tone was not commanding, but it carried authority, a balance of respect and experience. The man nodded slightly, his breathing evening out as he began to accept the officer's sincerity. Though his frustration lingered beneath the surface, time seemed to stretch, each moment charged with anticipation. The spilled coffee, once the focus of raw anger, now became secondary to the unspoken exchange of understanding and authority. The cafe's usual background noise, the grinding of coffee, the soft chatter, the clinking of cups faded into a subtle hum, almost as if the world itself had slowed to witness this delicate negotiation between two strangers. Then, the officer did something unexpected. He paused, reaching slowly into his coat, not in a threatening way but deliberately, with careful intention. The man's eyes followed the movement, his frustration momentarily replaced by curiosity. The cafe fell into a hush, patrons leaning slightly forward, sensing that something significant was about to happen. The air felt charged, thick with the anticipation of revelation. The officer looked at the man, his expression calm and steady. "I need you to understand who you're speaking to," he said, his voice firm but not harsh. The words were simple, yet they carried weight, signaling that the situation was far from ordinary. The man, still damp with coffee and slightly disoriented from the sudden shift, blinked, unsure of what to expect next. His earlier anger was now tinged with apprehension and a growing sense of uncertainty. The people around them could feel the change. Whispers grew softer, replaced by wide-eyed observation. Some patrons subtly reached for their phones, sensing a moment of importance unfolding. The tension that had initially revolved around spilled coffee now transformed into anticipation of revelation. The man, previously so focused on his ruined clothing and the shock of the accident, now wondered what could possibly make the officer so confident and commanding. The officer continued, slowly revealing a badge from inside his coat. It gleamed slightly under the cafe lights, a symbol of authority that went beyond the uniform he had momentarily been carrying. The man's jaw tightened, a mixture of disbelief and cautious respect flickering across his features. Recognition dawned slowly, like the first rays of sunlight breaking through clouds, and the magnitude of the situation began to settle in. The simple coffee accident had now become something entirely different. The cafe seemed to hold its collective breath. The spilled coffee and ruined suit were now trivial compared to the revelation of the officer's identity. The man, once ready to express his anger openly, now felt a wave of restraint, realizing that any rash action could carry serious consequences. The balance of power had shifted subtly but unmistakably. Leaving the man to reconsider his next words and actions, the officer's calm authority remained steady. Unshaken by the initial chaos of the coffee spill, his presence alone had transformed the atmosphere, diffusing anger and replacing it with cautious attention. The man, still processing the shock, began to soften, his anger giving way to a mixture of respect, surprise, and careful curiosity. By the time the moment passed, the immediate tension had dissipated, though the impact of the revelation lingered in the room. Patrons whispered in awe, some shaking their heads in disbelief at the unexpected turn of events. The spilled coffee, though still visible on the man's suit, had become secondary to the encounter that had unfolded in its wake. In that moment, what had started as a simple, accidental collision had transformed into a powerful, human interaction defined by authority, composure, and the surprising ways people respond when faced with the unexpected. The man's eyes widened as the officer slowly revealed his badge, the metallic glint catching the cafe lights in a way that seemed almost surreal. He instinctively stepped back, his anger and frustration now replaced by disbelief and a rising sense of caution. The badge was unmistakable. It carried the weight of authority, recognition, and consequences that extended far beyond a spilled cup of coffee. For a moment he simply stared, unsure of how to react. The initial rush of anger had dissolved into a mix of awe and apprehension. The officer's movements remained calm and deliberate, each gesture measured and purposeful. He kept his voice low but firm, ensuring that the man could understand the seriousness without feeling threatened. "Sir, I need you to understand the position I hold," he said gently. "Accidents happen, and I understand this was frustrating, but there are ways we handle such situations." There was no arrogance in his tone, only an undeniable authority that demanded attention. The man, still caught between his lingering irritation and newfound caution, nodded slowly, trying to process the sudden turn of events. The cafe seemed to shrink around them, the usual noise of steaming milk and grinding coffee fading into the background. Patrons leaned slightly forward in their seats, unable to resist the drama unfolding before them. Whispers filled the air, soft and cautious, as if everyone was waiting to see how this unexpected revelation would play out. The man, still soaked and stunned, felt the weight of every gaze upon him. The spilled coffee was now almost irrelevant compared to the presence of the officer standing before him, revealing an identity that changed everything. For the first time, the man became aware of the magnitude of the situation. He had been angry, ready to assert himself over the ruined suit and the shock of hot coffee. But now he understood that he was in the presence of someone whose role and responsibilities extended far beyond the ordinary. His frustration was tempered by the realization that any reaction could carry consequences he had never imagined. He could feel his pulse quicken, not from anger but from the sudden awareness of the power and reach represented by the badge. The officer, noticing the shift in the man's demeanor, kept his tone calm and measured. "I know this is sudden and perhaps surprising," he continued. "You weren't expecting this morning to unfold this way. And neither was I, but accidents can be handled with understanding. Not confrontation? He gestured slightly toward the spilled coffee. A small acknowledgement of the incident without dwelling on it. The man, now fully aware of the gravity of the situation, nodded again, his earlier anger almost entirely replaced by a cautious respect. The man's mind raced as he tried to reconcile the morning's chaos with the revelation before him. He thought about how quickly situations could change, how one moment of frustration could be overtaken by awareness of the larger world. The cafe, once just a place for coffee and casual conversation, had become a stage for an unexpected lesson in composure, authority, and the sudden realignment of power. He realized that his instincts, which had initially demanded confrontation, now required restraint. Around them, the patrons shifted slightly, their curiosity tinged with awe. A few whispered speculatively about the officer's identity, while others leaned back in their chairs, pretending to observe quietly but unable to ignore the tension and sudden intrigue. The air was thick with anticipation, a collective sense that the situation had escalated far beyond its original simplicity. The spilled coffee had become secondary to the human drama unfolding, a backdrop to the unexpected revelation of authority and calm. The man, still slightly damp and stunned, took a careful breath. He wiped at his suit again, this time more out of habit than frustration. As he considered the implications of what had just happened, he realized that the officer's calmness was not just about managing the accident. It was about demonstrating the kind of control and experience that comes from dealing with high-stakes situations regularly. There was a precision in every gesture, a quiet awareness that the man had not encountered before. He found himself instinctively adopting a softer posture, his hands lowering slightly as he acknowledged the new dynamic. The officer, sensing the shift, continued to speak with the same steady composure. We all have mornings that don't go as planned. We all face accidents or mistakes. What matters is how we respond and how we treat each other in those moments. His words were simple, but the delivery carried weight. The man, now listening intently, felt the lesson behind the words. The reminder that anger and frustration could be replaced with understanding and composure. He realized that his initial reaction, though human, was being reframed by the authority and calm presence of the officer before him. The cafe itself seemed to breathe with the unfolding narrative. The usual hum of activity, once background noise, now felt like part of the drama. Baristas moved quietly, careful not to interrupt, while patrons watched with subdued interest. The man, aware of the attention yet focused on the officer, began to feel a shift within himself. He recognized that the spilled coffee, the ruined suit, and the initial rush of anger were all temporary. What remained was the interaction, the lesson in human behavior, respect, and the unexpected ways people respond to authority. The officer, maintaining his composed demeanor, slowly lowered the badge back into his coat. He did not need to assert dominance or demand respect. It was understood through presence and calmness. The man, feeling the shift in atmosphere, nodded once more, this time with genuine acknowledgement. The tension that had gripped the cafe since the collision began to dissipate, replaced by a quiet sense of respect and understanding. He felt a subtle mix of humility and relief. The initial anger that had surged so quickly in response to the coffee spill now seemed almost misplaced in the larger context. He realized that the officer's calm authority had provided an unexpected example of how to handle challenging moments, a human-centered approach that emphasized understanding and composure over confrontation. He glanced around at the patrons, noting their expressions of curiosity and quiet appreciation for the way the situation had been managed. Time seemed to slow further as the man processed everything that had just occurred. He thought about how easily misunderstandings could escalate, how quickly tempers could flare, and how a single moment of patience and clarity could transform the entire situation. The officer, standing calmly before him, had not just revealed his identity. He had demonstrated a lesson in human interaction that resonated deeply. The spilled coffee, once the center of anger, had become the catalyst for a moment of learning, reflection, and quiet acknowledgement of authority. As the tension eased completely, The man finally allowed himself a small, almost tentative smile. He knew that the morning could have ended very differently, that a simple accident could have spiraled into conflict. Instead, it had become a powerful demonstration of how patience, calm, and human awareness could diffuse even the most sudden and heated situations. The cafe, returning to its normal rhythm, seemed almost to exhale collectively, as if the lesson had passed through the space and left a subtle but lasting impression on everyone present. The man, still adjusting his damp clothes, offered a quiet, sincere thanks. His voice, though soft, carried the weight of genuine acknowledgement. The officer nodded slightly, his expression neutral yet reassuring, signaling that the moment had been resolved without the need for further action. The two men, connected now by a brief but intense experience, had navigated a sudden collision of accident, anger, and revelation, emerging with mutual understanding and respect. As the morning continued, the man left the cafe more aware of the unpredictable nature of human interactions. He reflected on how quickly circumstances could shift, how anger could be tempered by composure, and how the unexpected presence of authority could redirect even the most heated emotions. The spilled coffee, once a source of frustration, had become a symbol of the power of calm, human-centered interaction, and the importance of responding thoughtfully rather than impulsively. The cafe returned to its normal rhythm. Yet the moment lingered, a quiet reminder to everyone present that even ordinary mornings could hold extraordinary lessons. The man walked away, his steps measured, his mind reflective, and his understanding of human behavior subtly but profoundly changed. The man, still slightly damp from the spill, felt the tension in his body slowly ease. He had been caught off guard by the officer's badge, and the sudden shift from anger to caution left him reflecting on the morning's events. He took a deep breath, aware that his earlier reactions had been driven by frustration, and he began to appreciate the calm, measured approach the officer had taken. The cafe, now returning to its normal hum of activity, seemed almost peaceful in comparison to the charged moments that had just passed. The officer, sensing the man's softened demeanor, spoke with a quiet authority. "I understand that this was not how you planned your morning," he said gently. "Accidents happen, and I know it can be frustrating when they do. The important thing is how we handle them. We can fix the situation without making it worse." His words were simple but carried weight, reflecting experience and a human understanding of conflict. The man nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over him as he began to respond in kind. He took a step closer, his hand still slightly trembling from the initial shock of the hot coffee and the officer's revelation. I'm sorry for getting so upset," he admitted quietly. His voice lacked the earlier edge, replaced by a genuine tone of acknowledgement. He realized that lashing out would not have helped, and that the officer's calm presence had prevented a situation that could have escalated quickly. The act of apologizing felt natural now, as if the tension in the air had cleared enough to allow honesty and reflection. The officer nodded, accepting the apology without hesitation. He offered a small smile, one that was professional yet kind, and said, "It's okay. I understand. The important thing is that no one was hurt, and we can take care of this quickly." He gestured toward the spill and the napkins he had placed nearby, signaling that the practical matters could now be resolved. The man, still conscious of the people around them, moved toward the counter to retrieve more napkins and began dabbing at his suit carefully, feeling the cool paper absorb the remaining moisture around them. The cafe's patrons began to resume their own activities, some whispering about the unexpected turn of events, others observing quietly with curiosity. The man noticed their reactions, realizing that the incident had captured more attention than he expected. Yet he also felt a subtle sense of gratitude that the officer had handled everything with such composure. The situation, which could have easily spiraled into confrontation, had instead become an unexpected example of human understanding and professionalism. The man's thoughts drifted as he worked on drying his suit. He considered the morning's chaos, the initial shock, and how quickly emotions had shifted. The officer's calm approach had allowed him to regain perspective and recognize that his anger, while justified in the moment, was not productive. He felt a new awareness of how interactions could be influenced by demeanor, tone, and presence. It was a lesson in patience and observation, one that he knew he would carry with him long after the coffee stain was gone. The officer continued speaking softly, offering reassurance and guidance. We all have moments when things don't go as planned. It's natural to feel upset, but how we respond makes the difference. You handled this well once you took a moment to step back, and that shows character. The man listened intently, absorbing the words. There was no judgment, only recognition of the human tendency to react quickly to frustration and the value of regaining control through thoughtfulness. A few moments of silence followed, filled only by the gentle murmur of the cafe. The man, now more composed, finally managed a small smile. He felt the tension leave his shoulders, replaced by a sense of calm and understanding. The officer's presence had transformed what could have been a negative encounter into an opportunity for reflection and growth. The spilled coffee, which had seemed like a disaster, was now a backdrop for a moment of human connection and mutual respect. The officer offered to help further, ensuring that the man's suit could be cleaned properly if needed. He suggested a nearby dry cleaner that could handle the situation quickly, emphasizing that he wanted to make sure the incident was fully resolved. The man accepted the advice, appreciating the practical consideration and the thoughtfulness behind it. The gesture reinforced the officer's commitment to resolving the situation calmly and respectfully, rather than allowing it to fester into conflict. As they spoke, the man began to engage more openly, asking questions about the officer's work and expressing curiosity about the responsibilities that came with such a position. The officer responded with measured detail, offering insight without revealing sensitive information, and the conversation shifted from tension to a more human conversational tone. Patrons listened subtly, intrigued by the exchange but respectful of the interaction. The cafe, once a scene of potential confrontation, had transformed into a setting for understanding and dialogue. The man felt a growing sense of respect for the officer. He realized that the initial shock and anger were natural reactions, but the way the officer handled the situation had demonstrated skill, empathy, and patience. It was clear that authority was not just about a badge or a title, but about the ability to influence situations positively and humanely. The lesson was subtle but profound. How one approaches conflict can completely change its outcome. The officer, recognizing the man's attentiveness, continued to offer guidance on how to handle such incidents in the future. It's easy to react quickly and let frustration take over, he said. But if we pause, take a breath, and approach things calmly, we can avoid unnecessary conflict. It's not always easy, but it's always worth trying. The man nodded, absorbing the advice, feeling that it applied not just to the coffee spill but to many areas of life where emotions could flare. Unexpectedly, time passed gently as they continued to speak, each word reinforcing understanding and patience. The spilled coffee had become almost incidental, a catalyst for a deeper interaction that highlighted human behavior, empathy, and the power of calm authority. The man realized that his initial anger had been an honest human response, but the officer's demeanor had provided a template for how to navigate such moments with composure and respect. By the time the conversation concluded, the man felt a renewed sense of calm and clarity. The officer's guidance, combined with the experience of the morning's chaos, left him reflective and appreciative. He had learned something unexpected about patience, human interaction, and the value of measured responses. The cafe had returned to its normal rhythm, yet the memory of the incident and the lesson it carried lingered, a quiet reminder of how ordinary events can offer profound insights when approached thoughtfully and respectfully. The man thanked the officer sincerely, his tone calm and genuine. He realized that the situation, which began as a simple accident, had evolved into a meaningful exchange. The officer's ability to maintain composure, demonstrate authority without intimidation, and provide guidance had transformed a potential conflict into a moment of understanding and human connection. The cafe's patrons, witnessing the resolution, returned to their own routines, subtly influenced by the demonstration of patience, empathy, and professionalism. As the man left the cafe, He reflected on the morning's events. The spill, the initial anger, and the revelation of the officer's badge had created a sequence of experiences that highlighted the importance of calm, respectful interaction. He understood that moments of frustration could be reframed through patience and that authority, when exercised with empathy, could lead to understanding rather than conflict. The experience left him more aware, more thoughtful, and more appreciative of the subtle power of human connection in everyday life. The man stepped out of the cafe, the morning sun warming his face and drying the last remnants of spilled coffee on his clothes. Each step he took felt lighter than before, not because the coffee stain was gone, but because the weight of anger and frustration had lifted. He reflected on the events that had unfolded, from the sudden collision and hot spill to the revelation of the officer's identity and the unexpected calm with which it was handled. The incident had become more than an accident. It was a lesson in composure, respect, and understanding that he knew he would carry for a long time. As he walked down the busy sidewalk, he thought about how quickly situations could escalate when emotions ran high. The spilled coffee had been a minor incident, yet it had nearly triggered confrontation. The officer's presence and calm demeanor had transformed what could have been a moment of conflict into a moment of learning. The man realized that his initial reaction, fueled by frustration and surprise, was natural, but it was the pause, the observation, and the acknowledgement of authority that had prevented escalation. It was a powerful reminder of how human interactions could shift in an instant based on demeanor and approach. He glanced back at the cafe, noticing the subtle ways people had reacted. Some patrons had resumed their routines, their eyes occasionally flicking toward the entrance as if to confirm the resolution. Others had whispered to companions, sharing impressions of the unusual morning encounter. The man smiled quietly to himself, understanding that the incident had left a subtle impact on those who witnessed it. It had been more than a coffee spill. It had been a demonstration of human behavior under stress and the power of calm authority. The man's thoughts turned to the officer. He had been surprised by the badge, the symbol of authority and responsibility that carried immediate weight. But what impressed him more was the human-centered way the officer had handled the situation. There was no arrogance, no attempt to intimidate or dominate. Instead, there had been patience, measured words, and a clear intention to resolve the accident respectfully. The man realized that authority, when exercised with empathy, could transform tension into understanding. As he continued walking, he thought about his own reactions. Anger had surged instinctively, but it had been tempered by the officer's calm presence. He understood that human interactions were delicate, easily influenced by tone, body language, and the perception of respect. The officer had demonstrated that responding thoughtfully could prevent unnecessary escalation and foster connection even in stressful moments. It was a lesson that went beyond spilled coffee. Touching on broader aspects of life and relationships, the man passed by other shops and people on the street, observing the subtle interactions that often went unnoticed. He reflected on how small gestures, like calm words and steady posture, could diffuse tension and create understanding. The officer's actions had served as a reminder that human behavior was complex, yet predictable when guided by empathy and patience. It was a realization that made him more mindful of his own conduct. Aware that reactions could have consequences beyond the immediate moment, he thought back to the cafe. The smell of coffee, the clatter of cups, and the hushed whispers of patrons. It had been a brief encounter, yet the lessons were lasting. The spilled coffee, the initial anger, and the revelation of authority had created a sequence of events that highlighted the importance of composure and respect. The man understood that human connections were fragile, but they could be strengthened through careful attention, patience, and understanding. As he approached his office building, he felt a renewed sense of perspective. The morning's events had shifted something within him, a subtle but meaningful awareness of how emotions could be managed and transformed. He realized that frustration was natural, but it was how one responded that defined the outcome. The officer's calm authority had provided a model, demonstrating that human-centered behavior could lead to resolution rather than conflict. The man paused briefly at the entrance of the building, taking a moment to reflect on the incident. He acknowledged to himself that the experience had been humbling and enlightening. It was a reminder that life was full of unexpected events, and the true measure of character was not how one reacted impulsively, but how one managed emotions and navigated complex situations with thoughtfulness and respect. Inside the building, he shared a brief smile with a colleague, though he said nothing about the morning's incident. It was a personal reflection, one that would influence how he approached similar situations in the future. He thought about how easily conflicts could be avoided through calm observation and deliberate action. The spilled coffee had been an accident, but the handling of it had become a testament to the power of human understanding. Throughout the day, he found himself recalling the officer's words, the measured tone and the composed presence. It was a quiet influence, shaping his interactions with others in subtle ways. He realized that patience, empathy, and respect were not just ideals, but practical tools that could prevent tension and create positive outcomes. The lesson extended beyond the cafe, affecting his mindset and approach to daily challenges. By evening, the man felt a sense of closure. The coffee stain had faded, but the memory of the encounter and the insights gained remained vivid. He understood that the morning had been a rare combination of chance, accident, and meaningful human interaction. It had reminded him of the importance of self-control, observation, and the careful exercise of authority, not just in professional settings, but in every aspect of life. As he prepared to leave work, he reflected on the impact of the encounter on both himself and those around him. The patrons who had witnessed the scene, the baristas, and even the officer himself had contributed to a brief but powerful demonstration of human connection. He appreciated the subtle ways in which behavior could influence outcomes, the way calm composure could transform tension into understanding, and the enduring value of respect in human interactions. Walking home, he thought about how small, unexpected events could carry profound lessons. The spilled coffee had been an inconvenience, but it had revealed a deeper truth about patience, authority, and human nature. He resolved to carry this lesson forward, aware that future challenges would inevitably arise, and that the way they were handled would define not just the outcome, but his own character. By the time he reached his apartment, the day had shifted from morning chaos to evening reflection. He felt gratitude for the unexpected insights, and a quiet admiration for the officer who had turned a minor accident into an opportunity for learning and growth. The experience had reinforced the importance of composure, empathy, and respect, leaving him more mindful, more aware, and better prepared for the unpredictability of everyday life. As he settled into his evening routine, the man thought back on the cafe, the spilled coffee, the moment of surprise, and the calm authority that had transformed the situation. It had been a brief, intense encounter, but its impact was lasting. He smiled, recognizing that even ordinary mornings could contain extraordinary lessons, and that the human capacity for understanding, patience, and reflection could turn accidents into moments of growth and connection.